All right, so today we're diving into a book with a really fascinating and, let's be honest, a pretty provocative idea about faith. It's one that challenges some of our most common assumptions. The idea is that for some things, you don't just hope, you take.
So let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself just waiting, hoping, wishing for some kind of breakthrough or for something in your life to finally change? Yeah, I think that's a feeling pretty much all of us can relate to.
Well, this is where the material we're looking at just completely flips the script. The author argues that faith isn't this passive waiting game at all. No, it's an action. It's a deliberate, decisive move to take what you believe has been offered to you. And that brings us to the very first core principle of this whole idea, treating faith not as a feeling, but as an action. It's not something you just have, it's something you actually do.
The author uses this really interesting comparison. They point to the business world. A successful entrepreneur doesn't just sit around and wait for a great deal to land in their lap, right? No way. They go out and they seize opportunities. And the core argument here is that that same exact mindset applies to our spiritual lives. It's all about making that shift from the passive waiting you see on the left to the active taking on the right.
Okay, but that brings up a huge question, doesn't it? What gives someone the right to just take these things? Well, according to the author, the answer is actually really simple. The gifts are already yours. They're just sitting there, waiting to be claimed. And to back this up, the author points to a pretty specific number, 32,000. They state this is the number of promises available to believers in the Bible. The key idea here is that these aren't just, potential blessings. They're presented as existing provisions, already paid for and ready to be collected. The author really zooms in on one critical word here, hath. It's past tense. And that one detail is the key to their entire argument. This isn't about something God will do in the future, but about something that has already been done. The act of giving is presented as a finished event. And they have this fantastic analogy to help explain it. Imagine you get a telegram. Yeah, I know, old school, but it says $1 million has been deposited in your bank account. Now, from that exact moment, that money is legally yours. But if you just sit on the couch and do nothing, you can't spend it, right? You have to actually write a check or go to the bank. You have to act. The author argues that God's promises are exactly like that money in the bank. They are yours, but you have to write the check of faith to make them a reality in your life. Of course, you're probably thinking, well, if it's that easy, why isn't everyone doing it? And that's a fair question. So what gets in the way? The author argues there are some pretty powerful forces, both inside us and outside of us, that are constantly trying to shake this kind of active faith. The book uses the famous biblical story of Peter walking on water to illustrate this. He steps out of the boat in faith and he's actually doing it. He's walking on water for a moment, but then circumstances get in the way. And these right here, these are what the author calls our modern-day waves. Just like Peter saw the wind and the storm and began to sink, the argument is that we get distracted by our very real, tangible problems. We see the negative bank account, we feel the physical symptom, we hear the bad news report. And just like that, our focus shifts from the promise to the problem. So how are you supposed to respond to these waves of doubt? According to this author, it's not with some gentle course correction. No, it's with an aggressive, forceful pushback to take back what's yours. The author points to this scripture to justify that forceful approach. The interpretation here is that accessing this spiritual reality isn't a passive activity. It requires an assertive, almost violent action to claim what's yours and refuse to let it be stolen. And this part is really fascinating. The author points to a specific interpretation of the word receive in a key verse about prayer. They say it's not a passive reception, like catching a gently tossed ball. It's an active, forceful seizure. It's a grip that refuses to let go. To make this point even clearer, the author paints this really vivid picture. Imagine you pull up to your house and you see a moving van parked out front. And then you see movers walking out your front door carrying your furniture. What would you do? The book tells this quick story about a woman trying to gently ask her dog to go home, and it's not working. But when she uses a tone of absolute authority and yells, "Get back up to the house," the dog immediately obeys. The author's point is that you have to deal with doubt with that same authoritative, no-nonsense command, just like you would with someone trying to steal from you. All right, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. How do you hold on to this victory when your physical reality seems to be screaming the exact opposite? The author uses the story of the fig tree to explain this delay. When Jesus spoke to the tree, in the spiritual realm, it was considered dead in that instant. But the visible proof, the withered leaves, that didn't appear for another 24 hours. The argument is that your victory is just as real in the moment you claim it, even if the physical evidence takes time to catch up. And here's a powerful story the author uses to illustrate this. A man takes his wife's salvation by faith at the altar and starts celebrating wildly right then and there. Days later, when she actually is saved, he's totally calm. Why? Because for him, the victory wasn't when it manifested physically. It was when he seized it by faith. The physical event was just old news. So, as you can see, persistence is absolutely crucial. The author lays out a practical battle plan. Refuse to let negative thoughts settle in. Actively counter them with scripture. Address the very first symptom of a problem before it can gain a foothold. And above all, hold fast to your confession of faith. And this quote really just sums it all up. It's a two-part action. First, the act of taking. And second, that relentless, stubborn refusal to let go, no matter what the circumstances look like. And so, we'll leave you with the central question from this material. What if belief isn't about passively waiting for something to happen, but about actively and tenaciously refusing to let go of a reality you've already claimed? It's a powerful idea to consider.